Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at an assessment walkthrough for the literature text Jane Eyre, which is for the English GCSE examinations. Now this is the third video in the series taking a look at Jane Eyre, so if you haven't checked out them already, please do check out our other videos. Also, if you haven't liked and subscribed, please could you do that, because it really helps us out when you do so. The first thing I'd like to think about then is just looking at those images, trying to attempt the challenges that follow. So first thing I'd like to think about is recall any details you can remember from our previous lesson. So our previous lesson was called Lesson 2, Jane Eyre, and it was looking at Gateshead Hall. And Super Challenge, how are the male characters presented in the novel? And finally, for the Mega Challenge, can you recall a key quotation to support your ideas with the Super Challenge? Now if you want to pause the video here at any point, please feel free to do so. You can always come back and revisit it, but now we're going to jump ahead and we're going to go through the learning objectives. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to recall key quotations, understand how to structure a response, and finally, apply your understanding to an exam-style question. Look at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. Starting with this extract, explore how Bronte presents the way male characters treat Jane. Write about how Bronte presents John Reed's treatment of Jane in this extract, how Bronte presents the ways one or more of other male characters treat Jane in the novel as a whole, and this assessment is going to be worth 30 marks. So first thing to consider when you have an exam question like this is, can you identify the key elements of the exam question? This is going to help narrow down our response and make sure we're focused on specifically what we need to focus on in our writing. Super Challenge. What assessment objectives does your response need to address? Now it's really important that we're actually aware of the kind of things that will actually get us marks within the exam. So are you aware of what the examiner is looking out for? And finally, which male characters would you focus on in your response? So typically if we have this extract and our extract's going to start off with John Reed, we're going to expect about 50 to 60% of your response to focus on that character. However, being able to actually demonstrate a good understanding of the novel as a whole and other characters as well is going to help you to get that higher marks in the assessment. Look at the assessment objectives and recall what you're being assessed on. So first of all then, for AO1, it says, include an informed personal response. Use a range of quotations to support your points. So what am I being assessed on? So do you have a good understanding of the novel, and can you identify the most judicious quotations? Now if you're not too sure what we mean by this, a judicious quotation means the most valuable quotations, ones where you can talk about writers' methods and their effect within the text. AO2, analyse language, structure and form with relevant subject terminology. So specifically, can you comment on the writer's methods, and can you do this in an effective manner? AO3, context. What is the relationship between the text and the contextual factors that are happening during the time? What am I being assessed on? Can I make appropriate links to the key historical factors and the impact it has on the novel? And finally, AO4, technical accuracy. Show awareness of your spelling, grammar, punctuation and varied vocabulary. A lot of us tend to neglect this when it comes to our writing because we're so focused on everything else that we need to include, but it's also important to remember, have you read through it, have you proofread your work and checked it for any errors that might be in there? Look at the extract below and attempt the challenges that follow. So this extract is the one that you'd find with the exam question that we looked at a moment ago. You can see from the paragraphs that we've got here that this is only a small snippet of what you'd be getting in the exam. So if you want to see the full extent of the extract, then please do click the link below, as it will send you directly to the full exam question. So as we read through this, we're going to be thinking about, can we identify any quotations that shows John Reed's treatment of Jane? That's going to be feeding into the question that we looked at a moment ago. So it's really important that you think about any key quotations or judicious quotations that's going to help us to respond to the question effectively. So it says then, habitually obedient to John, I came up to his chair. He spent some 3 minutes in thrusting out his tongue at me as far as he could without damaging the roots. I knew he would soon strike, and while dreading the blow, I mused on the disgusting and ugly appearance of him who would presently deal it. I wondered if he read the notion in my face, for all at once, without speaking, he struck suddenly and strongly. I tottered, and on regaining my equilibrium, retired back a step or two from his chair. "That is for your impudence in answering mamma a while since," he said, "and for your sneaking way of getting behind curtains, and for the look you had in your eyes 2 minutes since, you rat." Accustomed to John Reed's abuse, I never had any idea of replying to it. My care was how to ensure the blow, which would certainly follow the insult. If you want to spend more time now looking through the extract, please feel free to do so. We're now going to jump ahead and we're going to have a bit of feedback and think about what kind of quotations should we be thinking about, not just for this part of the extract, but also the full extent that you'd be faced with in the actual assessment. Class feedback. Check your understanding against the table below. So within the table, we're going to have a number of different quotations. These are going to come from the extract that we just seen on the screen and also the one that you can link to in the description below. So the first quotation: "He struck suddenly and strongly. I tottered, and on regaining my equilibrium, retired back a step or two from his chair." So in the left hand side, we're going to have our key quotations. In the middle, we're going to have the kind of techniques that we could comment on. And then on the far right box, we're going to have our inferences. So this is where we're going to expand on some of the key words, and we're going to try and relate this back to the focus of the exam question as well. So the first technique that I'd identify with this one is we have an aggressive verb or interesting adverbs. Quite often when you're analysing quotations, you might not always have things like similes and metaphors to zoom in on, so it's important that you identify a key word and use that to help actually build your analysis. So for the inference then, this is what we've said. John shows a clear intention to cause pain. In addition, the adverb suddenly reinforces the brutality of his actions. Secondly, we've got this quotation: "You ought to beg, and not to live here with gentlemen's children like us, and eat the same meals we do, and wear clothes at our mamma's expense." So again, this one hasn't came from the section that we just looked at. It's actually come from the full extent of the extract that you would get in the exam question. And the techniques that we've got here is a syndetic list and juxtaposition. Now, a lot of people get syndetic list and asyndetic list confused. The way to know it with this one is we know it's a syndetic list because it's when we have a comma which is followed by and you can see that there on several different occasions where it occurs in the actual quotation. So for our inference then, this is what we're going to say. The writer shows the contrast between the children through John's poor treatment. So potentially if Jane was someone who had parents who had a better kind of upbringing, had actually parents there to look after her rather than her aunt, then maybe John would have been treating her a lot better. He's clearly showing this kind of idea of a difference between the two based on the actual means that they have provided for them. And finally, the cut bled, the pain was sharp, my terror had passed its climax. Other feelings succeeded. So what we have here is a semantic field. Now a semantic field is a really good term to use, especially if you're struggling on any kind of techniques to comment on. So you can see here that we have a few words that are actually quite closely linked. We have words like cut, we have words like bled, we have pain, we have sharp, we have terror, all of which have a common connection to violence. So a semantic field is when you have several words that can be linked to a larger group or theme, such as pain, violence. But you can also go the other way and say much more positive things as well. So for our inference then, the writer has used a semantic field of abuse to show John's treatment. Additionally, the phrase "other feelings succeeded" suggests that the emotional harm is far more lasting than the physical harm that John has caused. So now that we've had a look at a few of the quotations, we're now going to move on and we're going to think about how we can actually talk about the other characters within the rest of the novel and how this applies to the exam question we looked at the start of the video. Look at the characters below and rank them in order of relevance to the exam question. So there's not many male characters in the actual text really when you think about it, but we can narrow that down to Mr. Brockhurst, St. John Rivers, John Reed, Mr. Rochester, and again Mr. Reed, who we don't really see obviously because he's Jane's uncle who obviously passes away, Now, the focus of the question was explore how Bronte presents the ways male characters treat Jane Eyre. So what we need to think about is, if you consider that question, I want you to think about which of the characters had the greatest impact within the novel, which ones treated her either particularly well or particularly poorly, and try and think about how you might justify it. Is there any quotations you can remember, either direct or indirect? How would you actually justify the ranking for each of these characters? Look at the introduction and attempt the challenges that follow. In this extract, and the novel as a whole, Bronte presents the male characters largely as abusive and domineering towards Jane. All of the main characters treat Jane poorly. This links to the writer's intention to challenge the perception of the male gender and the typical protagonist. So the first thing I'd like to think about is that challenge. So what makes an effective introduction? Is this an effective introduction? Try and think about the kind of things you'd be expected to produce when you actually have a go at the exam response yourself. Super challenge, identify any positive or negative aspects of the response. And finally, try and rewrite the introduction to give an overview of all the points you'll cover in your response. So a really good introduction will have an overview, not going in too much depth, but it will cover some of the central points that you're going to prove in the rest of your writing. So try and think about that, try and think about what makes an effective introduction, and if you can, try and build on the things that we've looked at today to actually try and attempt the exam question yourself. Class feedback. Mark your response against the success criteria below. So first of all, we have, is your response a well-structured response with a round and convincing viewpoint? So have you structured your response in a way that all the ideas link together and you've clearly ascertained your viewpoint? You haven't used any contradictory language like it might mean this, it could mean that. Have you actually got your point across in a clear and convincing manner? Have you used a detailed analysis of the writer's methods? So is there anything that's been used in terms of language or of structure that you can use to support the points you are making? Have you embedded quotations? Now this is an important thing, especially when you think about academic writing. When you get to sixth form university, you will not be expected to be writing things like, this can be seen in the quote. If you're using quotations naturally, if they're embedded in the sentence, then it's going to flow in a much more appropriate and professional manner. Consider different perspectives and interpretations. So have an open mind. Try and have the confidence to consider different viewpoints, different ways that people perceive the characters and their treatment towards Jane. Have you used an appropriate comment on context? Now that's a really important word there when it says appropriate. So are you just chucking in random comments about context, or is it really appropriately put into a point that you're trying to make? Does it actually help support the point, or are you just throwing it in there because you've got a nice nugget of information that you want to get on the page? So the trick with using the context, just make sure you're using it quite sparingly. Make sure that it really does relate to the point you're trying to make in the whole of your paragraph. And finally, have you demonstrated an understanding of the novel as a whole? Do you understand the characters, the main themes, and some of the main sections within the text? If you're able to demonstrate this with the examiner, they're going to feel confident that you understand the text well, that you've engaged with it, and you understand the methods and the intentions that the writer has put into place. What I'd like you to do then is I'd like you to try and stretch and challenge yourself, use the success criteria to try and write the rest of your response if you haven't done so already. If you need any additional support or help, the new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, leave us a comment below or visit our partner channel Bookworm Teaching for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much for listening, guys, and if you've made it this far, please do check out the rest of the videos in the playlist that go through other elements of Jane Eyre as well, not to mention English language, English literature. We've got so many resources. Let us know if there's anything you want us to focus on, and we'll happily make something to suit your needs. All the best. Bye bye.